Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm absolutely delighted and honored, actually, to introduce our next guest, Mr. Tom Hubler, who can genuinely be said to be a founder in the field of family business consulting. He is an expert in the area of conflict management and succession planning as a consultant. He founded the Family Firm Institute. You'll have to excuse me, I've got to put my teeth back in. Uh, he's president of the Hubler for Family Business Families. He's an author, speaker, and for 19 years was editor of Family Business Review. He's also taught for 10 years at the University of St. Thomas in family business management. Now, I'm sure I've missed a lot out, and I'm hoping that Tom will fill in any gaps as we speak to him. So welcome, Thomas, and thank you for taking the time to join us.
You're certainly welcome, and thank you. I'm honored to be here and be a part of this with you.
Thank you. Same. I feel very honored to have you with us. So I'd like to start off, Tom, by asking what I ask everybody at the beginning, and just to kind of fill me and the audience in a little bit with your story, what brought you to where you are today, um, and what the sequence of events was that made it happen.
Well, basically, it was an accident, and I had been a family business therapist, or family therapist actually, and I had gotten a Bush Leadership Fellow to study organizational development. And I got it by saying that mental health professionals don't do within their own systems what they teach their clients to do, which is true. So my original plan was to work for the nonprofits and help them get their act together. It was a brilliant idea. I got to go to school again and all that, but it never dawned on me that there's no money in their budgets to pay for those services. So I went, duh. So then I began to do work for law firms and physician
Right.
groups that have a terrible time managing their differences. And in the early 80s, I was in Cleveland to deliver a paper at a conference, and I accidentally came across an unpublished paper on family-owned businesses written by Dick Beckhart and Elaine Kepner. I
Hmm.
read it on the airplane coming back to Minneapolis and said to my partner, who was an attorney, I said, this is a much better blend of our backgrounds. And so at the time, there was only a handful of people in the country, only one university program, nobody here in the Twin Cities. And so we developed a practice that became nationally known, and we ended up selling it to McGladrey and Pullen, which was an accounting firm. So I was with McGladrey for a while. And then I left, and that's when I began to help the University of St. Thomas create their family business program. And then I think I mentioned, or you mentioned, that in 1996, I was invited to teach the family business management class for 2 years while the professor was on a sabbatical. Well, as it turned out, he never came back, and I did that for 10 years.
Wow.
So that's how I got started.
So what was it about family businesses specifically that piqued your curiosity, your interest?
Well, first of all, it's the challenge. I mean, the whole idea of being a family and at the same time working together is a big challenge. In addition to that, the other thing was that my partner was an attorney, a corporate attorney, who said to me, he said, I'm getting kind of bored with the law, and could we work together? So the idea of working on both sides of the equation, both the business side and the family side. And one of the things I discovered right off the bat was that there was an emphasis um, around the bottom line. What's the bottom line in the business? Blah, 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 blah. Well, it occurred to me there should be a bottom line on the family side. And so that's one of the things that I have explored over the years is the development of the emotional bottom line in family businesses, which is critical.
Emotional bottom line, Tom. You can't just throw a phrase like that out without telling us what that means.
What it means is it has to do with when I taught at St. Thomas, I used to say all the time that business and financial differences that are normal will eventually erode your family relationship unless you're proactive and positive to what I call, and I've converted it to building the emotional equity of the family. And so the emotional bottom line is the relationships that have to do with how we all relate to each other in families. And and the number one of the things I've discovered over the years is I have my David Letterman list of the 10 obstacles to succession planning. And it's, number 10, number 9, number 8, da, 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 da. Well, anyway, the number one obstacle or issue in family-owned businesses is the lack of expression of appreciation, recognition, and love. And that's what drives, from my perspective, what goes on in family businesses, and why, and from my perspective, again, why there's so much tension having to do with family businesses, because the senior generation desperately wants that from their younger generation adult children, but will deny to their dying day that they need it or care about it or looking for it. And the kids love their parents, but take them for granted and don't say that we appreciate you and we love you and da 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 da, and vice versa, where the parents do the same thing with their kids, where they say, we love, they take them for granted and they don't say, I love you or I appreciate your contribution to the family business. And that's, to me, what drives the system.
Right. Okay. Now that is
So,
fascinating. Sorry.
so there's one other thing I would mention to you. There's a guy who used to teach at the University of Chicago. His name is Michele Csikszentmihalyi, and he wrote a book called Flow. And there are three things that create flow in people's lives: work, active leisure time, and relationships. And when he was talking about relationships, he was talking about family relationships. And he wasn't talking about family relationships of business and wealth that are at risk. He was talking about regular ones. And he says that families in today's environment cannot survive without the regular infusion of what he calls psychic energy, which is built, again, from my perspective, building the emotional equity of your family and doing things to preserve your family relationships and so forth. And that's what gets overlooked in family businesses. The emphasis generally and the energy and the resources are all put on the business side, oftentimes at the expense of the family side. And that's what creates the rub.
Fascinating. I mean, this is something that I too have experienced, seen, heard anecdotally, and so on. Um, because, okay, there are many families that have this, if you like, breakdown in communication
Right.
in terms of trust and love and so on. But with family businesses, there's an added dimension, and please correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but there's an added dimension because there is such a huge overlap between the work and the home.
Right.
And on top of that, especially when you're talking first gen, the founders of the business, who tend to display certain characteristics, hard nosed, uh, uh, perseverance in growing the business, single mindedness, all of those. And somehow those seem to push out the need or understanding for the need of emotional connection in the family. Have you seen that as well? Or?
Yes, yes. And that's one of the tragedies, is the loss of family relationships, because the business becomes the family. And if you're not active in the business, you feel like you're left out of the family. And in spite of the dynamic that you've just described, which I think is prevalent in family businesses, where the owner entrepreneur, particularly the first gen, is so single-minded, as you've indicated, there is an element of desire on their part to be loved and appreciated that they have denied and stuffed down inside of them someplace, and they try to forget about it, but you can't. um, when I do presentations, one of the quotes that I love to share, and have a movie clip, is from the movie The Bridge on the River Kwai, which was a 1957 film that starred Alec Guinness and got the Best Academy Award for Best Picture. And it's a story about these British prisoners of war who are being forced to build a bridge for the Japanese. And at the very end of the film, Alec Guinness, who was the English commandant of the prisoners, was reminiscing about his career. And he said, I've been home. He said, I haven't been home more than 10 months this whole time. And it's been 28 years, and I've loved India the best. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. But when you realize you're closer to the back end than to the front, you begin to wonder about whether or not your life has meant something or not, particularly in comparison to other men. I don't know if that thinking is very healthy, but I must admit, I've been thinking like that from
Mm.
time to time. And I would suggest to you that everybody who gets into their 60s and 70s starts thinking about that. And even if you're a hard-nosed entrepreneur, and the third obstacle to succession planning is control. And the reason they're so successful is they're in control, but that's their Achilles heel. And so they're, as I said earlier, they're secretly wishing that people would tell them and validate what they've been up to for the last 30 or 40 years and that they're loved.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And often they don't even know that they're wishing for it.
Right, right.
you know, but they are.
One of
And
the,
what?
one of the fellows that I co-taught with at the University of St. Thomas had a father-in-law that owned 3 Firestone tire stores in Omaha, Nebraska. And he said to Glenn one day, he said, when I go to heaven, he said, I hope I can still sell tires. So his fantasy of being in heaven was being able to sell tires. Well, that's a typical entrepreneurial response.
Right,
They
right.
want to do what they love to do. Whether it's selling tires or this, that, or the next thing, that's what they love to do.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I hear you. And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? This single-mindedness,
Yes,
double-edged. You have to be like that, but at the same time, you do compromise or even sacrifice so many other important pieces of everyone's life.
that's right.
Inclu-
Right.
So in your experience, in your work with these family business owners, what's your approach to getting them to open up and recognize the value of these connections, these personal connections? How do you
So,
deal with it?
so one of the first things I do is ask them, what are the family values that you would like to see perpetuated in the company? And we use those values to create a common vision to inspire them as a family so that they have something to unite them at a superordinate level so that as they articulate what they want for themselves, it's done under this umbrella. And that's one of the first things that we do to get them started in that regard. And talking about, what they want and how they're feeling and all those sorts of things, which are critical in terms of the family business. And then it's not unusual for me to get together with like a father and son or 2 brothers or whatever to talk about what their expectations are and what they need from each other in order to thrive, both thrive from a business perspective as well as a family perspective. And and then the third thing that we do is that most of us have never had a class about how to talk about difficult things in a positive way. And so one of the things I do is I introduce them to a program called the Collaborative Team Skills, which is a program about communication and management of differences. And it emphasizes, communication styles, talking skills, listening skills. One of the skills we use the most, but get the least amount of education, is listening, and teaching people how to do deep listening. And one of the things I pass out to clients in our what I call my initial family business planning meeting is a handout from a book called Managing from the Heart. And the heart is an acronym. And the H is hear and understand me. It's critically important to build understanding. And the E is even if we disagree, please don't make me wrong. So you and I could have a difference of opinion about whatever it is we're talking about, and we don't have to make each other wrong or bad. And the A is to acknowledge the greatness within each other, which gets to my number one issue about expressing appreciation and so forth, to be able to do that genuinely. The R is to remember to look for my loving intentions. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go down to the office today and screw up my family or screw up my business. People just don't do that. Now, the truth is, I've met 2 or 3 entrepreneurs over the years who would do that, but but 99% of them won't.
Right,
And then the T is to tell me the truth with compassion. So
right.
I believe in honesty, openness, and candor about everything, but it needs to be done with kindness, care, and respect. And so that when we have family meetings, which is something that I use a lot to to discuss and resolve these issues, we the idea is to be able to speak your truth without judgment, criticism, or blame. And you were speaking earlier about the overlap, the tremendous overlap between the family and the business system. And that's, to me, what creates most of the problems. And the way you create balance between those two systems is to have structure and formality. So that's a lot of what I do, is to help them develop the necessary structure and formality. And clients say to me, Tom, we don't need all that structure and formality because we love each other.
Right.
And I say to them, it's because you love each other that you need structure
Needed.
and formality. And so that's, so part of the answer, getting back to your original question, is in order to get people to open up, you have to have a safe environment where people know they're going to be heard, they're going to be respected. And when you have that kind of environment, and it's the responsibility of the facilitator convener to create that environment.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing, that I've noticed over time, and I suspect you've had the same, is that when family business owners and successors think about the transitioning, the succession, call it what you will, they tend to focus only on the hard stuff, yes, on the financial, on the legal,
Yes,
on
yes,
how do we value the business and how do
right.
we control ownership and stuff like that, and completely gloss over actually the most important things, because if the topics you're talking about aren't in place and people aren't on a similar platform, if you like, then no matter how good your planning is, your technical planning is, you're going to you're going to come across some major obstacles.
Yes, yes,
You
that's
know,
true.
and that often has the power to pull down the whole process altogether. So you end
Correct.
up with, sad to say, a complete disaster on many fronts. So when I mean, okay, you have this area of specialist expertise, Tom, and it's fascinating and very powerful, obviously. What is it that makes somebody want to come and talk to you? I mean, do they wake up one morning and suddenly see the light that, oh my goodness, I need to tell everyone I love them? Or is it something else that I mean, what is it they say when you have that first conversation with them?
Um, Basically, excuse me, that's the home phone.
No worries.
Um, Basically, what drives the system, from my perspective, is people feeling unhappy and not fulfilled. When the senior generation calls, they call and say there's a problem with the kids. When the kids call, they say it's a problem with the senior generation. And so this is a number of years ago. I was doing a presentation and I had these circles, a family circle and a business circle on PowerPoint. And we got to this part of the presentation, and this young man said, he said, those circles are equal in size. If my dad were drawing those circles, his business circle would look like this, and his family circle would look like that. Then he said, now, if my wife were drawing those circles, her family circle would look like this, but her business circle would look like that.
Right.
So next time you do the presentation, he said, I think you ought to mention that. And he was going to sit down, and someone said, well, what do your circles look like?
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'd rather not say. Now he
Uh,
was there with his whole family, caught in the middle between his dad, two people he loved, his dad and his wife. And the background was that 2 weeks prior to the seminar, the dad had called me and said, I'm in business with my two sons. My older son's an engineer. He's my heir apparent, and he's been terrific up until 2 years ago. But that's when he got married.
right.
And my daughter-in-law is the problem. And can you come and fix her? I said, no, I don't do that sort of thing.
Fix her.
Right. So what happens? So what happens is, in family businesses, is what I've just described to you from my perspective is an organizational problem that people within family businesses experience as an interpersonal issue. And the way they deal with it is to blame. As I said, so when the younger generation calls, they want to, put the heat on their dad or their mom or whatever, and vice versa. When the senior generation calls, they want to put the heat on the kids. And the truth of the matter is, when things go well, we all contribute to that. And when things don't go well, we also contribute to that. And the only thing that we can change is our contribution to the problem. But the
Right.
truth of the matter is, usually when they come, they all want to change each other rather than themselves. And that's again part of the process is to learn that you can only change your contribution rather than what other people are doing.
Absolutely. Look inwards first and
Yes,
see what
yes,
your responsibility is for
yes,
creating the situation in which you find yourselves.
right. When I
Uh,
was when I was
mhm.
a young professional and I was being trained to be a family therapist, part of the training had to do with understanding our family over 3 generations and who my great grandparents were and so forth and so on. And my dad was deceased at the time. And I was sitting with my mom and she was explaining to me my dad's side of the family and everything. And I spontaneously said to my mother, I said, Mom, I've been trying to change you all of my life.
Mm.
And she said, you're not going to win.
Yep. With mums, you very rarely do.
Right, right. So I thought, oh, okay, I got it. I got it. So I stopped trying to change people a long time ago.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. Absolutely not. They've got to want to change themselves, um, if at all. So,
Yes.
so that then triggers another question in my mind. Let's suppose we're now in, and I'm sure many of our audience are in this boat, where you are a family business owner, you are looking at your potential successors. Um, they're not quite ready yet. Maybe they're not old enough, not experienced enough, not seasoned, if you like.
Right.
What is it that that person should be thinking about in terms of laying the groundwork for that relationship to be able to make the transition from family into business as seamlessly as possible without
I think,
coming across these issues?
yeah, I think a big part of what you're describing now or expressing is the importance of developing a career and leadership plan for the next generation. And so that, the people that I work with, one of the things that we do when that issue is there is to work with an industrial psychologist to develop a career plan and understand what people's strengths are and what their areas of development are. And what we're trying to do is to build on their strengths. And so that when they get to the point where it's time for them to assume responsibility of leadership, they're prepared to do that. And at the same time, there may be an opportunity to hire a non-family person to be the president of the company or the CEO of the company, where part of the responsibility is to train and develop and prepare the younger generation and to help them implement that and debate and to place people in positions where they're going to be successful rather than unsuccessful.
Right.
And the characteristics that we're looking for are competency, character, and commitment, the 3 C's of leadership: competency, character, and commitment. And on the basis of that, help people wrap their career around their sense of purpose, helping them develop their sense of purpose so that they can manifest that. And that's what's going to, create happiness for them, is their ability to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And sometimes I'm sure what happens is that the impression, if you like, that the older generation has of their successors or potential successors turns out actually not to be accurate. Often you'll see, oh, I've got Fred or I've got Mary, whatever, and they're good at this, so they'll be great in the job.
Right.
But then when you call in, the professionals, the industrial psychologists, for example, and you find that actually Fred isn't that, that's not really where his passion is. That's not really what he
Right.
enjoys. It's not his
Right.
strength.
I had a client one time where he had a law degree and he was being groomed to be the president of the bank. The company, the family business, had several businesses, and one of them was a bank. And during the interviews, he confided in us that that was not what he wanted to do with his life. And he said, but he was afraid to tell his parents because he was worried that it would disappoint them. And so we helped him have the courage to tell his dad in particular that he really didn't want to be the president of the bank. And he ended up leaving the family business and went up to, it was northern Michigan, and basically, got into an arts career and did something altogether different, and lived happily ever after.
Well,
but
there you go. Hmm.
but because of the pressure, and oftentimes there is pressure to assume these responsibilities, and it's like I've had other clients where the son said, "Well, I want to join the foreign service," and the dad said, "Well, you can go to Europe and I'll pay for that. You can go for the summer, but I want you back here working in the family business." And the dad was the dad at this time. Now he'd spent his whole career in the family business. Had been very unhappy. And so what he did was he said he decided not to talk to his kids at all because he didn't want to put his sons through what he had gone through. And they were complaining about the fact that the dad had never invited them to join the family business. It was like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this seems like a, a shift on on a multitude or from a multitude of perspectives. So from the older generation's perspective, a shift in being open to the possibility that the successor is not what you believe them to be,
correct, correct.
and also a shift from the potential successor's perspective that it's okay, to speak up and not be ashamed and not feel guilty and not feel like you've let the family down
Right,
if you say
right.
I don't want to do it. Now that those are pretty. I mean, when both parties have grown up or spent so many years thinking and behaving, feeling like that, those are pretty big shifts for them to make, aren't they?
Yes, yes. I mean, part of the problem is that, again, I don't know if you've got kids, but it's not unusual for parents to project their own desires onto their kids. And I don't know if I've had a chance to tell you, Sheem, what a good hockey player my son can be, right? Well, he can't even skate, let alone play hockey. But that's my dream, right?
Right, right,
So I push him into hockey, and I do, all that sort of stuff. And that happens in family businesses all the time, where the dad or the mom will project their own unfulfilled dreams onto their kids and expect them to live out those dreams. Well, when that's not what they're up to.
right.
That's not what's going to make them happy. So part of the responsibility of parents in being a parent, a good parent, in my opinion, is helping your children and as they grow older, understand what their purpose is in life, what they're here to do. Uh, there's a guy who wrote a book called Callings, Greg Lavoie, and he has 19 questions in there that you can answer to help you figure out what your calling is in life. And his second question is my favorite question, which is, what's the one question you were born to answer? And
Fantastic.
part of, working with the next generation is to help them discover what that question is. And some kids get it really early. Some kids, takes a while for them to discover that.
Mm. So, how do we build a culture that absorbs or incorporates this way of thinking? Now, I'm thinking out loud actually, because
Yes.
this is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it starts again, from my perspective, with having a plan. And I think there are four plans you need to have in a family-owned business. It's an ownership plan, which includes governance, a management and leadership plan about who's going to do what, have what responsibilities. What's the plan for career development and leadership development, and what's the plan for compensation? And then lastly, what's the business plan? And when you're an entrepreneur, you can get by without having one.
Right,
But when you've got multiple people in the business, you have to have, from my perspective, a business plan. And then the fourth plan we've talked about earlier is a family plan about
right,
building the emotional equity. So basically, you start by saying that these are the four plans, and every family business is different in terms of where they're at in regard to those four plans. And you develop a culture about having a plan and implementing a plan and using either family meetings or a family council, but generally it starts with family meetings to address and resolve these kinds of issues, and to keep, and to develop the necessary, as we've talked about earlier, the necessary structure and formality to be successful.
Right. Right. And okay, I know this is a kind of very open-ended question because there's so many variables. But typically, how long does it take to get into that sort of position where this becomes the norm, where we recognize the need for a family plan and a business plan and so on?
I think, everybody's different,
Hmm.
and every family business is different. And there are some families that do it, in a year or two, and some take, 10 years or something like that. And, I have a client that I started working with 30 years ago when it was the dad and an uncle and two sons. Well, the two sons now and their adult children. Now, I
Hmm.
haven't worked with them for 30, straight 30 years, but they are now going through another shift and are in the process. And we've been working together for the last 3 or 4 years to develop the culture and the necessary skills to make sure that whether you're in or out of the business, there's a sense of well-being, a sense of not being corrupted by the money, a sense of developing a purpose. All those sorts of things are really important. The other thing that I haven't mentioned to you yet that I think is really important to take
Hmm.
into consideration is what I call the last challenge of entrepreneurship. And people say, well, what's that? Well, it has to do with the fact that owner entrepreneurs loathe the idea of leaving the company. They don't want to do that. And I understand why, that's really tough. So from my perspective, they don't have to leave the company, but what they have to do is change their job description and become the architect and the designer with their family and with their advisors of the new ownership system, the new management and leadership system, and also then the development of their legacy.
Right.
And I believe that they can identify something that gives them heart and meaning, so they can continue to come to the company, but begin to focus on these other things that are really critically important. I believe that owner entrepreneurs are driven by their dreams, and so part of the last challenge of entrepreneurship is developing a new dream for yourself and with your partner about work, active leisure time, relationships, family, philanthropy, family history, legacy. All those sorts of things are the things that you can be working on actively and becoming the chairperson of the board, while and keeping your like your fingers in, well, actually your nose in, and keep like noses in, fingers out.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And
Don't
so
interfere
that
too much. Hmm.
so there's a lot to be done in terms of the changing of the job description and the last challenge about entrepreneurship, to pull that off and to do it
Mm.
successfully, and to do it successfully with your partner, because it's sometimes a situation where they're not, the husband and the wife are not at the same place at the same time. And there was a situation, this is a number of years ago, where I was meeting with the accountants, and they were expressing and explaining to the entrepreneur about this wonderfully, beautifully tax-driven plan for him to retire to Arizona. And this was 9 o'clock in the morning. At
Hmm.
10 o'clock, they brought the wife in to explain it to her, and she slapped her hand on the table 3 times and said, "I'm too young for my husband to retire." And he didn't
Fantastic.
retire for another 5 years. And she had been, raised the kids, gone back to school and gotten a PhD, and she was teaching in one of the local colleges. And the idea of him retiring and going to Arizona did not fit her plan. So it's
No.
important that you work together with your partner to come up with a plan that's going to be a win-win rather than win-lose.
Right.
And that's the other thing, in terms of the culture, is that it's critically important in family businesses to develop solutions that are win-win rather than win-lose. And it's when there are win-lose situations, that's always a lose-lose proposition. But again, people become, strident and emphatic and so forth about their perspectives, and they, it's not win-win. It's I win, you lose, and that's, again, you've got to create a different kind of environment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And a different way of thinking, a different way of communicating. I mean, as you said earlier, Tom, we all think we communicate pretty well, but actually most of us are pretty rubbish at it. We do.
But when it gets emotional, it's sometimes really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no. I mean, we've all been there,
Yes,
we say and we respond to things that we thought we heard rather than what we
yes,
actually heard,
yes,
and
yes,
say things which we didn't really mean or think through. I mean,
right,
so that's a journey as well. So it's a real combination of factors that we're really talking about that need to come together. It has to
yes,
start with the willingness, I suppose, to see that there is something needs to change,
yes,
and then keeping an open mind to changing yourself first,
yes,
communicating better, and most importantly, almost, to start early, because these things take time to embed themselves.
yes, they do.
Yeah. So what can you share with us an example, Tom, of a family that you worked with who did this really well, who went through this process really well, and what happened at the end of it?
I think that I'm trying to think. There are several. Uh, what I'm thinking about now is a situation where, in the previous generation, the dad, this was a construction company, and the dad left, or he sold the business to his one of his sons,
Mm-hmm.
and basically gave the real estate and the land and buildings and so forth to the other adult children. And as a result of that, there was a lot of tension, and the eventually the brother bought out his siblings, but they were always um, emotional. There was emotional distance as a result of the tension over that. So the dad in this generation basically did not want that to happen, and he's got four adult children, and he started with his wife. I met them at their accounting firm, and they decided to proceed. And so for 3 years now, we've been working together to develop a plan for him, so that he and his wife, basically have developed a life, what I call life career plan for the senior generation. And he's basically hired a non-family president and been able to delegate that through. He's currently in the process of initiating a board of directors with outside advisory people. He has a son who's being trained. He's just he's in his probably early 30s, and just is now being trained to develop more competency in the business. He has the entrepreneur has three other children, two daughters. The older of the two is at the University of Chicago, and will never probably have an interest in the business, but participates in all the family meetings. I forgot to mention the older son who's being trained, his wife works in the company,
Oh.
and she came from her own family business, and there was some initial tensions between the couple, the son and his new wife, about a prenuptial agreement. And the parents in this family wanted a prenuptial, and she was reluctant to do that. And part of the problem from her perspective was that her parents sold their family business and gave a big chunk of money to her and her husband. And so so they were able to, they went to counseling and got that all worked out, and so forth. Then the third daughter, or the third child, is a daughter who's gotten her accounting degree and is in the process of getting her certification. and passing the CPA exams. And there's a possibility that she might eventually come into the company. And then the youngest is still at the University of St. Thomas here in the Twin Cities, getting his engineering degree. And both his girlfriend and the boyfriend of the third child have been participating in family meetings, and they've been having family meetings, again, 3 meetings a year. The most recent meetings, we've been talking about well-being and what it means to have a sense of well-being, a sense of purpose. The dad has explained um, the financials to the adult children. The company, I think 48% of the company is held in a trust for the benefit of the kids. And so we've talked about what that is and so forth. And he's explained that to the kids, that he's going to have this summer, he's going to have a field trip where he's going to bring all of the family together and take them on a tour of the company resources. And
Fantastic.
so that's an example. And I've got, multiple clients like that. I had a client down in Wisconsin where they did the same thing. And the dad started it, he was a mechanical engineer and started the business in his garage. And he had like 4 adult children, and one son worked in the business, and there were a couple of daughters who did not, and then a brother who did not. And they used to meet we got to the point where we would meet just once a year at the family's hobby farm. And and we would have a program for the adults and then a program for the kids, financial, to teach them about money and wealth and so forth. And again, they would celebrate their family getting together. And this is again one of my favorite clients. And one of the stories was that he hired a non-family president. His son was not ready, so he hired a non-family president, and it didn't work out. So he fired the guy. Then he hired another guy, and it was working really, really well. And they used to meet on a monthly basis, and they were having a meeting, and at the bottom of the agenda for the meeting was, his name was Tom's schedule. And they got down there, and the non-family president said, if I'm going to be successful around here, you can't be here as much. And he said his face went ashen white, and he kind of grabbed his throat. And he's like, well, wait a second. I've got a boat on Lake Michigan, and I've got this hobby farm. I'm going to be fine. So 2 or 3 months later, they were having another meeting, and down at the bottom of the agenda again was Tom's schedule. And they got down there, and Tom said, I'm really doing a good job of it, aren't I? And the non-family president shook his head from side to side like, no, you're not. Tom said it was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. But he was able to master it. He was able to do that, even though it was a challenge. And again, they were a very successful family business, and had gone from the garage to like a $90 million business.
Wow.
And
Fantastic.
so
So there you go. Those are the tangible results of,
yes,
of
it's
doing
like,
it right.
From my perspective, you can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
you can have a successful, profitable business and loving, caring family relationships if you're willing to make the effort to put the work in to make it a reality.
Absolutely. And not to shy away from the difficult conversations,
That's right.
to be open and honest and be prepared to accept that maybe there are some things you need to rethink about yourself.
One of the things we haven't talked about, Ashim, is there's this famous theory that's taught in all the business schools around the world, and it's called Hubler's speck of dust theory. Are you familiar with it?
No.
You've never heard of it?
Well, I may have, once you
I
tell me
can't
about
believe.
it, I may have.
Where did you go to school? I can't believe this.
Well, obviously not the right places, Tom.
I can see that. There's this. Well, anyway, so Hubler's speck of dust theory is there's this little issue between you and I about doing the business. No, I better not do that because we're all going to get together for the picnic to put the dock in this summer at the lake. And if I bring that up, it's going to upset our relationship. Well, then
Right.
it's Thanksgiving and it's Christmas and it's whatever. And I don't talk about these differences that you and I have. I avoid them. And by doing so, I create the very problem I'm trying to avoid by not talking about our differences. And so that's one of the things that's really critically important in family businesses is that when there are issues, you address them directly and purposefully and intentionally to make sure that they get discussed and resolved. Otherwise, you create a problem that becomes unmanageable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're just kicking the can down the road, really,
That's
aren't
right.
you? It'll
And it
come
gets
out
worse.
one way or the other.
And it gets worse once you do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. My goodness, I could talk to you for hours, Tom. I mean, so many exciting and interesting stories you have to share, insights and a wealth of experience. It'd be so much fun. Unfortunately, the clock is against us, Tom. The clock is against us, which is terribly sad. Um, but thank you so much for taking
You're
that
welcome.
time and sharing. I mean, some fascinating insights based on your experience and expertise. And I think our audience will gain a huge amount of value from listening to what you've said. So I understand before we have to sign off that you have a free gift to our lucky audience.
Well, I have
For our lucky,
multiple free gifts and they can choose one, but
wow,
I have like 3 or 4 chapters of books that I've written. And one is called Mindfulness and the Management of Family Business Stress. Another one is The Delicate Family Issues, which is just come out in a book. The Trust Paradox, and the Solo Family Business, which was a chapter in a book before I wrote my own book, The Solo Family Business. And then if people are interested, I have an entrepreneur's checklist, which, it's like a checklist of 16 things that entrepreneurs need to do. I have a shareholder code of conduct, which I would be happy to share. And then there's the 10 obstacles to succession planning. And those little 3 things, they're just sheets of like lists that I'd be glad to send. So whatever they would like, I would be happy to send them.
that's extremely generous of you, Tom. Extremely huge wealth of information available to you, free of charge from
Yes.
Mr. Tom Hubler. That's very generous. So how do they get a hold of these things, Tom?
All they need to do is email me at tomh at the Hubler Group, Hubler group.com. And I have them available and I'll just forward them to them.
Okay, so Tom H at Hubler,
The, the
sorry, the
hublergroup.com.
Hubler Group, thehublergroup.com. Excellent. Well, we'll be sure to include that your email address as well with this video. So if you haven't had a chance to write it down, you'll be able to access it anyway. So I'm sure your phone will be ringing off the hook, Tom. I mean,
All right.
that'd be great. So again, many thanks for sharing your time and your wonderful insights. And I look forward to our paths crossing again shortly.
That would be wonderful. And I look forward. I was talking to my wife about, we got to go to Poland.
Absolutely. You have an open door here,
Thank
somewhere
you.
to rest your heads.
Yes. Well, thank you
Okay.
again for having me. It's an honor, as I said earlier, to be a part of this. And so I'm happy that you were able to get me in. So thank
No,
you.
thank you. It's going to be such an amazing package of interviews. Covering a huge diversity of areas, which I think will add enormous value to family business owners and their successors.
So will I get a copy?
Oh, all right then. Of course you will. All right, Tom. It's
Oh, all
very
right.
demanding, very demanding. Okay, of course, with pleasure, we'll be sending you a copy.
Terrific. Thank you, Arshad.
Take care now.
All right. Bye
Bye.
now.
Bye.